On September 7, 2012, 19-year-old University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill student Faith Hedgepeth was found dead inside the apartment she shared with her roommate in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. She was a gifted student with a Gates Millennium Scholarship and a dream of becoming a pediatrician. Her death launched one of the most closely watched unsolved murder investigations in the Chapel Hill area. There was DNA. There was a handwritten message on a fast food bag. There were surveillance recordings. There were witnesses. There was a roommate whose timeline would later become the subject of intense scrutiny from the defense. And yet, for almost 9 years, investigators did not have a name. Then, in September 2021, the case changed forever. A DNA investigation led authorities to Miguel Enrique Salguero-Olivares. He was arrested and charged with Faith's murder. But 14 years after Faith's death, the case still has not reached a verdict. As of this recording, Salguero-Olivares has pleaded not guilty. His trial is scheduled to begin on September 28, 2026. So this isn't a story about a case that has been solved in court. It's the story of a young woman whose future was taken from her, an investigation that spent years without an answer and a trial that is finally approaching. Faith Danielle Hedgepeth was born in North Carolina and grew up in the Hollister area near the Warren-Halifax County border. She was a member of the Haliwa-Saponi tribe and was deeply connected to her native heritage. By the time she reached college, Faith had already accomplished something remarkable. She earned a Gates Millennium Scholarship and attended UNC-Chapel Hill, where she studied biology. Her goal was to attend medical school and become a pediatrician. She wanted to eventually bring that knowledge and medical care back to communities like the one she came from. Faith wasn't simply a student with a career goal. People who knew her remembered her personality just as much as her academic achievements. She was described as outgoing, warm, and someone who seemed to make friends easily. Her family and friends would later speak about her smile, her energy, and the way she made people feel welcome. On the evening of September 6, 2012, Faith was in Chapel Hill with her roommate and friend, Karina Rosario. The two students spent part of the evening studying at Davis Library on the UNC campus. Eventually, they returned to their apartment at Hawthorne at the View. But they didn't stay there for long. The two women decided to go out dancing. They went to the Thrill, a nightclub in downtown Chapel Hill. Surveillance footage later helped investigators reconstruct parts of the night. Faith and Karina were seen at the club before leaving in the early hours of September 7. According to records later examined by investigators, they returned to their apartment at around 2 a.m. And this is where the timeline becomes critical. Because after they returned home, the two roommates did not stay together. Karina later told investigators that she wasn't feeling well. She eventually contacted Jordan McCrary, a UNC student she knew, and arranged for him to pick her up. According to court records and later reporting, Karina left the apartment at approximately 4:25 a.m. She believed Faith was still inside when she left. Around 11 a.m., Karina returned to the apartment with another friend, Marisol Rangel. They called out for Faith. There was no response. When they went into Faith's bedroom, they found her unresponsive. Karina called 911. The discovery immediately became a homicide investigation. Investigators determined that Faith had died from severe blunt force trauma. A bottle found at the scene became an important piece of evidence. Investigators also recovered DNA and other forensic evidence that would remain significant throughout the investigation. And then detectives found something else. A handwritten message on a fast food bag. The message included the words, "I'm not stupid." It also included an insult and the word jealous. Investigators considered the message an important piece of evidence, although its exact meaning and authorship became part of the investigation. Was it a message directed at Faith? Or was it intended to mislead investigators? Those questions would remain unanswered. And the DNA evidence created an even bigger question. Who did it belong to? Police began reconstructing Faith's final hours. They interviewed people who knew her. They examined surveillance footage. They reviewed phone records. They collected DNA. And they began comparing the available forensic evidence with people connected to the investigation. But the DNA did not immediately give investigators a name. For years, investigators had evidence without an identified suspect. The case became one of Chapel Hill's most prominent unsolved murders. The Hedgepeth family continued waiting for answers. And as the years passed, the case remained open. Then came the breakthrough. Investigators eventually turned to advances in DNA and genealogical technology. Instead of simply asking whether the DNA matched someone already known to investigators, authorities were able to use genetic information to identify relatives connected to the unknown profile. That investigative path eventually led them to Miguel Enrique Salguero-Olivares. In September 2021, almost exactly 9 years after Faith's death, investigators arrested him. He was 28 years old at the time and living in Durham, not far from where Faith had been killed. The arrest was a major turning point. For 9 years, Faith's family had waited for a name. Now they had one. But an arrest is not a conviction. Salguero-Olivares was initially charged with first-degree murder in connection with Faith's death. Later, prosecutors added 3 more charges: first-degree rape, first-degree sexual offense and first-degree burglary. Prosecutors alleged that Salguero-Olivares was responsible for Faith's death and that the additional charges are supported by evidence gathered during the investigation. Salguero-Olivares has maintained his innocence. And as of this recording, he has not been convicted of any crime. In August 2026, through his defense attorney, he pleaded not guilty to the charges. His trial is scheduled to begin on September 28, 2026. That means the allegations against him still have to be tested in court. Faith Hedgepeth was 19 years old. She was weeks away from her 20th birthday. She had earned a scholarship. She had chosen a career. She had a community behind her. And she had a future that she never got the chance to live. Her family has spent 14 years waiting for answers. On September 28, 2026, that wait is expected to enter its next and most important stage. But whatever happens in court, one fact will never change. A verdict cannot give Faith back the years she should have had. It cannot restore the future she planned. What it can do is answer a legal question that has remained unresolved for 14 years. Did the prosecution prove that Miguel Enrique Salguero-Olivares was responsible for Faith Hedgepeth's death? For now, that question remains unanswered. And that is where the story stands. Not with a conviction. Not with a final verdict. But with a young woman whose life ended far too soon, a family that has waited 14 years for justice and a courtroom preparing to finally decide what happened inside that apartment on Old Durham Road. Faith was more than the case. She was a person with a future. And that is how she should be remembered.